Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about the Vampire Coast in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The Vampire Coast is one of the weakest races in the game, and certainly one race that doesn't quite fit very well within the context of Warhammer 3. Because they're pirates, and Warhammer 3 really favors factions that are about taking territory. Sure, you might have some factions like Dark Elves, Greenskins, Warriors accounts that might be burning and pillaging a lot of territory they encounter along the way, but then they also build it up or use it for other purposes like vassalization. Whereas in a Vampire Coast campaign, you do get the looting and pillaging part done, but the problem you're gonna have is you're still gonna want to take and sell a territory because you need that for your economy, and you're not particularly great at that. The economic potential in a Vampire Coast campaign is fairly limited. I mean, no joke, Norsca actually generates a far better economy than you, at least with ports. The Vampire Coast economy just is fairly weak. Their land-based economy, if you will. The reason behind that is they're just not generating a lot of money. Yes, their ports can go all the way to 800 at tier 5, but really you're mostly going to have tier 3 ports throughout the course of your campaign. That is one of the problems. Money determines how many armies you have, determines how many heroes you have, determines how many high-level settlements you have. All of that is going to have an impact in your campaign. So what I am saying over here is that the Vampire Coast absolutely needs an economic buff in their economy. Yes, they're regular settlements, they're regular slave pits that get made into meat markets, and then certainly when we're looking at the plunder piles, they can generate some decent level of money, but compared to the costs that are associated with the Vampire Coast, it is going to be fairly pathetic. Like, this is a turn 39 campaign. I'm only generating only generating 10k over here, or close to 10k, and I'm spending about 8k on my armies over here. And here's the thing to understand. While you can certainly play a Vampire Coast campaign with one army, and that's the reason that they worked within the context of Warhammer 2, because Warhammer 2 was all about building a really powerful one-man Doomstack, or one Doomstack, or two Doomstacks in a campaign. Warhammer 3 is about building as many armies as possible, and for that you simply need resources. That is the problem of the design of the Vampire Coast. They worked within the context of Warhammer 2. They don't work within the context of Warhammer 3. Furthermore, on top of that, when we're looking about sacking settlements, looting and occupying them, you also have another dynamic. The settlements that generate the most amount of money are ports, because your land-based economy is outright pretty pathetic. But here's the problem with ports. You also want to occupy them for the sake of pirate coves. And the problem with that, beyond the fact that you're using a port settlement which could generate more money, yes, the Smuggler's Cove can generate 200, but really a tier 1 port is like, considering the fact you can only build these in ports, yeah, that isn't exactly great, and it's a choice, by the way. So you're not really getting money from these pirate coves. Instead, you're actually going to lose money. You could set up hideout if you're interested in it, and then gain income from the settlements, from the local settlements income, assuming the faction controlling the settlement actually does end up building a substantial level of income, which is absolutely not a certainty in a campaign. Like, looking at the greenskin situation over here, I don't have any particular settlement in this campaign so far where that would be worth it, really, compared to, say, building a Smuggler's Cove. Problem is, you can't just ignore these things either. Like, you might say, oh, they're just not worth it, so don't bother with them. Well, beyond the fact that you have an entire mechanic that's unique to this race, that's not worth it. Same like with Skaven Undercities, but then again, Skaven Undercities can be very powerful and very substantial because you can spread them around, and they can confer to you significant benefits in your campaign. Even if you're forced to build them in basically unpleasant climate where you would not play your campaign, but you can use heroes for that. You can also use heroes for these pirate coves. The problem is, you can't... one, your hero capacity is actually going to be limited, and the only real way of increasing hero capacity, at least for Morgan hunters and gunnery rights. Well, if you want certain hero types, you're going to need to get heroes for them. Because if you look at Morgan hunters, you can't really do it in any other way. Like if you look at regular settlements, it ain't gonna happen. You do have vampire fleet captains that can be increased. Their capacity can be increased from ports. Though the problem is that it does require a tier 5 port. There are of course some other ways of increasing hero capacity, or one other way at the very least. If we look at a fleet that's attached to certain lords and your legendary lord, you do have a way of increasing the capacity for vampire fleet captains. But otherwise, like, you're gonna need higher level ports, and there's only so many of those horde armies that you have in a campaign. You're going to need ports at tier 5 for vampire fleet captains, which are pretty powerful heroes, to be clear. But if you want gunnery wights, if you want Morgan hunters, you're going to need to get a lot of these pyre coves. And the problem with that is, like, obviously these conflict with each other. Like, you would want to take territory to improve your economy, you can seize it, but on the other hand, you actually want the heroes, because your heroes can be very, very powerful in campaign, and you are going to rely on them to win campaigns, unless you're playing something like Aranessa. So that particular dynamic that gets created in a campaign because of this is not exactly fantastic in a lot of ways. So those are two issues. Economic potential, yes, they can generate a decent amount of money from looting and sacking settlements. So I would have to say all the treasure hunts you get in a campaign are feel kind of worthless. The rewards are certainly not worth it. And while you can traverse the seas very quickly, it just doesn't really feel worth it to go out of your way for the sake of those treasures. And while they can generate a good amount of money from sacking settlements, I mean, you look at the race like the Skaven, they can do that, but they can also generate a regular economy pretty well. You look at the Greenskins, like the best races, surprisingly, some of the very, very best races in the game have both a substantial land-based economy or settlement economy, and also substantial economy from looting and sacking settlements. Without exception, the best races, without exception, have both. The Vampire Coast doesn't have that. They don't have any better income from sacking and looting and settlements than, say, the Greenskins or Skaven or Dark Elves, but they also can generate a lot of money through regular settlements. So they're in that trouble spot. So I think their economy needs to be buffed, and I also think, like, hero capacity, like the Pyrocoves, like the way they work is just like they need to be redesigned completely. Yes, they can't be removed, but unless the settlement is raised, then you've got a problem. That's the issue in your campaign. Also, setting this up, and the reason you don't set up an undercity if you're playing Skaven through just attacking with an army, kind of actually creates vulnerabilities. It's like an issue with the Norskins as well, because they want to sack a settlement one turn, then they want to raise it the second turn for the favor of the gods, then they want to occupy it. In your case, the issue is, like, you want settlements, you want ports for their income, that's the principal way of earning money as them, but on the other hand, you want pirate coves for the sake of their hero capacity, and nothing else. No other benefit is even more important. Maybe detaching hero capacity from that, I don't know. That's just one of the things I would certainly change. Beyond that, and certainly a very, very substantial issue, actually, beyond that, I would say, like, there are that Warhammer 3 should take a note from actually Total War Pharaoh and what they did recently with the Sea Peoples. It's like, Sea Peoples have, like, this kind of dynamic between being raiders on the seas and having a lot of power through their horde armies, but also they can have regular armies, and there's pros and cons of both. And I think, like, yes, I'm going to say it, for all the issues Pharaoh has, like, I think that recent DLC really showed how you can do a faction like this far better, because you can choose. Like, you want to focus more on land, you want to focus more on settlements, you can do so. You want to balance it out, or you want to focus on full raiding. All of those are viable choices in a particular campaign like that. So I think, yeah, there's some really great ideas in that. Though, it's always going to be a problem with like horde armies, and this has been a case with horde armies since their creation, that they can be really powerful, but CAO is always limiting them in some way. So you're never going to have, you might have one powerful army, but that's just as you're going to have one powerful army in a game where on the highest difficulty the AI has 2, 3, 4 armies. Like, yeah, look at our Anissa's army over here. I've just lost some units here, or I want to get some units for, you know, Regiments Renown and all that. But you look at our Anissa's army in this particular campaign, it's a pretty good army, but it doesn't matter when Zamundi is about to shove 2 full stacks against me. And those Sacred Cigars, holy cow, I did not expect them to do that. And also Lord Croak just chilling over here because reasons. Oh yeah, that's sensical. Regardless though, I mean, this army has certainly done fairly well in this campaign. I've got an alliance with Belagar. I have multiple armies in this campaign. I'm winning this campaign. That's not the issue. But here's the problem with the Vampire Coast. An issue you may not realize exists here, but it certainly does. And the issue is the unit roster. Okay, if you're playing on RNSA, you do get the Sartosa Free Company, you do get Man-Eaters from ports if you own the Ogre Kingdoms DLC, so you actually have some really sweet units over here. Expensive, to be certain, with the Man-Eaters, but you don't just get a bunch of Ogres, you get a bunch of Sartosa Free Company and a couple of Ogres, and you just put the Ogres through for the Sartosas, and they actually end up being far more effective. I have no concern whatsoever that this army is not going to win against Grom, for instance. Like, I'm just going to demolish them. But that's Arnissa's campaign and the uniqueness of her campaign. The Vampire Coast roster as a whole just sucks. Like, the vampires themselves suck. The zombies, sorry, not the vampires. The vampires, the heroes and lords are excellent. Like, that's the problem. Your heroes and lords are good, but a lot of the units you have are really bad. I mean, depth card do work, but they require you to get to a higher tier in a settlement. So it's like, yeah, getting to tier, like playing without any kind of proper infantry until tier 4 is just such a horrible experience in a campaign. You do have powerful artillery, you do have powerful melee lords and heroes. So you can make it work with artillery and lords, but it's not a particularly great playstyle when like, you can handle melee if you've got a good battlefield or you use your gunpowder power, but like, the stats on these units are this is genuinely one of the worst rosters in the entire game. Like, I get it, it's disposable, it's cheaper in a lot of ways to at least recruit it, though not necessarily so as you might think. Like, you look at the cost of some of these guys, yeah, they're not necessarily that much cheaper. Or actually, I'll look at our Nessa. We look at the cost over here. Yeah, some of these things can certainly be cheaper. Other things, maybe not so much. Then that's one of the things to point out. Though, of course, you can argue that it's balanced around the idea that you have horde armies. But the thing is, not every army you're going to have is going to be a horde army. So a horde army with the casualty replenishment, campaign movement range, artillery, and all that, the upkeep benefit is going to be powerful. But a regular army is not. That's the problem. You have a severe imbalance between horde armies and regular armies. And there's a hard limit on how many horde armies you can have in a campaign, because you only have your legendary lord, and then you have the 4 named admirals, the legendary admirals, in your campaign. But regardless, the entire roster over here, in terms of infantry, in terms of range units, just really sucks. The gunpowder stuff sucks because gunpowder units by default, vanilla-wise, don't work very well. Stuff like Radius or some other mods does actually improve it. Like, if you want to give certain mods real credits, like, ooh, imagine gunpowder units actually not being completely fucking worthless on the battlefield. Shocking, I know, but that's a deliberate decision by CA. It obviously can work different. They've chosen to go down this path. I'm not sure why. Maybe because tournament players are complaining. Oh, you'd be surprised by how much Total War is defined by this. You'd think Total War would be focused on single player. No, and I've found this out from someone who actually worked from Creative Assembly. It's like I asked them, like, what difficulty do you design the game around? Because, you know, I actually was curious to know about that. Like, is it normal? Did they put any effort on Legendary? And it's like, the answer I got was, they build the games around tournament players. Make of that what you will. It's certainly annoying. It's obvious that they're doing it. But because you see patch after patch after patch where they change nothing in terms of the campaign, but change unit costs for multiplayer. So yeah, they clearly care about this. It's really, really frustrating that they put so much effort in one aspect and very little on another, and it's also frustrating when one aspect affects the other. So like the stats that zombie units have, that happened because people were really annoyed back in the day of Warhammer 2 about how powerful these units were, quote unquote, and now we get utter trash for the Vampire Coast. That's what you get. I mean, there's some decent stuff. I wouldn't say Necrophex Colossi are really as powerful as people make them out to be. I'm serious. Like if I face the Vampire Coast in battle, I'm not terrified of the Necrophex Colossi. There's other things I might be terrified about. Like, yeah, Morgulls are actually scary in a battle. Like, Morgulls can be scary. Some of the other units can be scary. Necrophex, I think single entities in general in Warhammer 3 aren't the powerhouses that you might expect them to be. Just my perspective on that. Like, I've my very first campaign that I won in this game was actually in Immortal Empires. That is, was actually as Noctilus. So I played out with those Necrophex Colossi, and I gotta say, it was disappointing compared to like the hype people had built up around them. Because I never bothered playing this faction in Warhammer 2. Just didn't feel like it was worth the money. That's also another thing. So the unit roster is not worth it. The economy is limited. You can play as Arnesta and get like unique units in her campaign with the Sartosa Free Company, Sartosa Militia, and Man-Eaters if you own Ogre DLC. So if you pre-order the game or bought Ogres later down the line. Then again, who would buy Ogres later down the line? Ogres are horrible as a race. Easily one of the worst races in the game. And Vampire Coast is certainly up there. Like, absolutely not worth picking up this DLC in Warhammer 3. That's what I would say. So they need to change. They need to make, like, multiplayer concerns I can understand, but they need to really change that unit roster for the sake of campaign experience. And yeah, I don't see why the unit roster shouldn't work differently in a campaign. Maybe just tie it to research that's easily accessible. I don't know. But regardless, the baseline unit roster sucks. Gunpowder units in general don't handle well, so that's what I would personally fix. And just change the incentive structure in a campaign. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I certainly am not interested in playing the intern button simulator. I find Warhammer 3 to be most interesting when you have a lot of territory, and also a lot of armies to deal with that territory, and you have choices and consequences to make with that. That's when Warhammer 3 shines. That's why I think the Castors are an STR race, because they have a lot of those decisions, as opposed to having one or two armies with limited territory. That's where I stand on that, and I think that's the kind of fundamental gameplay where the game excels at, and that's where I think the Vampire Coast early fails at. So they need to be more in line with that kind of vision. Or they need to be earning such gargantuan amounts of cash and having their entire campaign decided by that, like with their Pirates Ultimate, right? So earning a lot of cash should be part of their campaign, but how they deal with the infighting among themselves because of that cash, that might also be something very important. That's how I think about it. What some of the dynamics could be in a Vampire Coast campaign. Right now, not really that great. A very outdated faction. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.